Hello, my name is Shripati Sridhar, and welcome to my presentation on learning the helical topology of musical pitch. Let's get started. Resonant sounds have a harmonic structure. Typically, the harmonics of these sounds, apart from the fundamental, involve excitations at twice the fundamental, which is an octave, thrice the fundamental frequency, and so on. This harmonic structure of resonant sounds elicits cognitive associations between notes that are an octave apart. Removing the odd partials, for instance, causes the perceived pitch to morph to twice its original frequency. This can be seen in the top left image here. Another example of an interesting cognitive phenomenon is when the fundamental frequency and the partials are gradually raised in frequency to twice their original value. The perceived pitch also morphs to twice the original fundamental frequency. These, among other phenomena, imply that frequencies must have octave-related consonants and that they can be arranged along a spiral helix where circular rotation denotes pitch class and vertical movement denotes pitch height, where notes with the same pitch class are located close to each other on consecutive spirals. This is, in fact, a well-known and foundational aspect of music theory. Now, the motivating question arises, if this is a well-known fact, is it obvious in the data? And if so, can the intrinsic topology of sounds be learned from unlabeled data? Moreover, can a helical topology be discovered in all kinds of audio data? If not, what is the scope of this claim? To this end, we take inspiration from a study conducted in 2007, looking at digits from the MNIST dataset as well as objects from the NORD dataset. Manifold learning, specifically the Isomap algorithm, was able to show that pixels correlate with each other in pixel space. And this can be seen in the diagram here, that the correlations could be discovered from a scrambled pixel space with no prior knowledge of pixel orientation. And Isomap, calculates the geodesic distances on a k nearest neighbor graph, and metric multidimensional scaling then transforms these distances to embedding coordinates. This is the method that was used on image data. The question we ask is, if we extend to audio with frequencies instead of pixels, what happens? This is our workflow. We start with raw audio data, which has been obtained from different data sets. These data sets will be discussed in further detail in the next slides. This raw audio data is then transformed to a constant Q representation and compressed with a logarithmic loudness mapping. We then compute a Pearson correlation matrix to obtain correlations between frequency bins. Then a k nearest neighbor graph is obtained with a shortest distance, and these shortest distances are then transformed to embedding coordinates using the MDS. These two steps constitute the Isomap algorithm. Let's look at the workflow in more detail. From every recording in the dataset, we choose a frame of interest. This frame of interest is, these frames of interest rather over several recordings are concatenated to form our dataset. We then compute the Pearson correlation matrix, and it's worth noting here that the correlations are logarithmic frequency by logarithmic frequency. And the pitch classes A2, A3, A4 are musical notes labeled here to highlight the octave correlations in the matrix. And 2, 3, and 4 correspond to the octave number. A shortest path distance matrix is computed from the k nearest neighbor graph. And this provides the distances needed for the embedding topology seen in the final image on the right. And here, every colored dot is a frequency bin, Each frequency bin, irrespective of octave, has the same hue. And the hue color bars have been added to the correlation and distance matrices for reference. Let's take a look at the data sets. We looked at 3 different data sets, music, speech, and urban sounds. For music, we looked at the Sol dataset, which contains 7 instruments, and we pick a subset of 3 performance dynamics because they have a clear pitch class. With this, we arrive at a dataset of over 1,200 recordings. And in the Sol dataset, each recording contains a single note played by an instrument with a specific performance dynamic. Next, we have the speech dataset, where 12 voiced vowels are enunciated by adults and children. And we have a dataset of over 9,000 recordings. Lastly, we look at the Sounds of New York City dataset, where we have annotated segmented sounds of various types of machinery, dogs as well as humans. We choose recordings where there's no speech or music for it to be distinct from the other 2 sets. And this gives us over 200 recordings. Let's go over the experiment protocol. For the CQT, we use 24 bins per octave and limit to a 3-octave representation. From every recording, we choose a frame of interest from from the stable region in the recording. We choose our model parameters manually on the music dataset. The default settings used in the experiment are a logarithmic loudness mapping and a value of 3, k equals 3 neighbors in the nearest neighbor graph. The reasons for our choice are discussed in the next slides. We experiment with different settings for k, which is the number of neighbors in the nearest neighbor graph. Setting k equals 2 results in an embedding with multiple disparate lobes, as you can see in the image here. This indicates that the correlations between neighboring frequency bands seem to outweigh the correlations between octave-related bands. On the other extreme, when we set k equals 5, it results in a more intricate topology. And the band correlations between notes that are half an octave or 3 semitones apart are more prominent than the correlations between notes which are simply an octave apart. We thus empirically find that setting k equals 3 works best in highlighting the octave correlations, which are of interest. Another parameter that was varied was the loudness mapping. We explored linear and nonlinear loudness mapping. Linear mapping is the identity function and results in an embedding which has correlations for the lower octave, but not the higher octaves. This can be seen in the correlation matrix here in the top row as well. Looking at the nonlinear loudness mapping, we have more pronounced correlations across the 3 octaves. Logarithmic loudness mapping was chosen as the default for our protocol. Let's take a look at the results of our experiment. On the music dataset, our hypothesis is confirmed where helical topology is learned by the Isomap algorithm in the embedding from unlabeled audio data. This can be seen in the image here. Here, the correlation matrix is on frequency data from the entire music dataset, and the 2-dimensional embedding learned from the Isomap algorithm. And here we use the default parameters as described earlier. It is worth noting, though, that within the music dataset, the embedding topology depends on the type of instrument. Here we look at 2 subsets of the Sol dataset, the trumpet and harp subsets. The trumpet is an instrument whose sounds contains many harmonics. Let's listen to an example of the note A4 played on a trumpet. As you can hear, it's a fairly bright sound and has many harmonics. This can also be seen in the sample spectrum from a trumpet recording seen here. Due to this presence of many harmonics, as can be seen in the Pearson correlation matrix, there are long-range octave band correlations. And this results in the sort of helical topology that we see in the Isomap embedding. Now let's take a look at the harp subset, and let's listen to a recording of the same A4 note played on a harp. The harp does not have, the harp sounds rather do not have strong, prominent harmonics. And this is also visible in the sample spectrum taken from a harp recording. As you can see in the correlation matrix here, the semitone level correlations are quite strong, but these long-range octave correlations are not consistently found across the range of notes that are played. This results in the sort of rectilinear topology that we see in the embedded. Let's look at the speech dataset results. First, we can listen to a voiced vowel sound from this dataset.
Hood.
That was quite brief. Let's listen to it again.
Hood.
This is the vowel oo, voiced by an adult female. And for our experiment, we extract the relevant vowel portions from the recordings. As one might expect, we find that speech is less harmonic than music. Some correlations exist, particularly in the higher frequencies, but they're not as uniformly present across the frequency range, unlike the music set. And this is why we see the sort of quasi-helical topology in the Isomap embedding. Here's an example recording from the Sounds of New York City dataset. You can hear a large engine in this recording, presumably from a bus. This, among other engine sounds and machinery, such as jackhammers, typically do not have an ordered harmonic structure. There are relatively few or no correlations across the frequency range, which could be denoted as octave band correlations. And this is visible in the Pearson matrix, Pearson correlation matrix. One might even say that pretty much all frequency bins are correlated. This is what results in a fairly rectilinear topology in this dataset. In this experiment, we show that the Isomap algorithm can, in fact, be used to learn the topology of frequency data in sounds. Specifically in musical sounds, helical topology is uncovered, which sort of validates cognitive experiments and knowledge from musical theory. Urban sounds, on the other hand, have a rectilinear topology, while speech has a quasi-helical topology. In future work, we plan to experiment with bioacoustic data as well, since that is an interesting data set for our interests. Our findings indicate that in neural networks, perhaps specifically convolutional neural networks, weight sharing architectures might be designed based on the topology of the data. This topology can be learned in an automatic, unsupervised manner, as we have shown. Previous experiments have explored such a framework. A study conducted in 2016 incorporated a convolutional operator on the pitch spiral, which takes advantage of octave band relationships. This was found to improve the performance of the ConvNet on a musical instrument recognition task when applied to a subset of frequencies on a CQT input representation. Moreover, a study conducted in 2017 used a harmonic CQT representation where CQT features of harmonics of the fundamental frequency are stacked in a three-dimensional representation similar to the red, green, blue channels of a color image.